Welcome back, Social 20. This is our first day of studying the actual French Revolution now. This is lesson 3. And as you can see here, it's a quite ambitious list of outcomes. So let's get started. In the past, we've already constructed our idea of what were the causes of the French Revolution. Today, we're going to need to create a timeline of the major events. And to help you with that, I've identified the major events in purple here. So we have the calling of the Estates General, we have the Tennis Court Oath, storming the Bastille, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, abolition of feudalism. We have the Women's March on Versailles, civil constitution of the clergy, the attempted escape of the king and queen, some foreign wars, the abolishment of the monarchy, the execution of the king, the rise of the Directory, and Napoleon seizing power. Now, in order to accomplish this task, there's many different steps that we can do. You can consult some timelines that are shown here. There's an excellent 10-minute video that I recommend that you watch here in green. And then there's some enrichment if needed, but I'd begin with that 10-minute video. It'll outline most of the events. We are going to try to concentrate on key events and key people, and these are outlined in green here. So a key event, maybe the most important event, is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and its importance will be illustrated in this 8-minute video there. Robespierre is one of the key individuals in this lesson, and as you can see here, there's lots of summaries on Robespierre. And why Robespierre used violence is shown through this long article. A lot of these are time consuming, so depending upon how much time you have, you might want to look deeper into Robespierre. We also talked about the Committee of Public Safety and what that was here. And there's a quote by Robespierre, virtue without which terror is destructive, terror without which virtue is impotent. And again, there's quite a lengthy enrichment activity on the Committee of Public Safety, if that's something that you desire to look at or that you need more clarification on. And we have a section here on Napoleon and Napoleon's policies as well. It'll focus on Napoleon's domestic reforms and his foreign policy. So that's an introduction, if you will, to the timeline activity that we're looking at. So I'm going to quickly go over these major events. So event 1A, calling of the Estates General. So as we may remember from our lesson on the causes of the French Revolution, France was experiencing the verge of bankruptcy. There was an inefficient taxation system, and for the first time in more than a century, King Louis XVI, he found it necessary to call upon the Estates General. He was hoping that if he could bring the three estates together, then he could reform the taxation system, get more taxes, finally get some taxes from the nobles, and resolve the bankruptcy issue that was an urgent crisis. But once they called the Estates General, what ended up happening was the members of the Third Estate, representing 97.5% of the population, they have this moment of clarity. And in this epiphany, they realized that, why should people who represent 97.5% of the people, of French, why should they be one of three estates? The math doesn't really, show that idea of equality of political voice. So there's pressure within the Estates General, led by the Third Estate, led by the new rich within the Third Estate, the bourgeoisie, who have some economic power, who now want political and social power, to redefine, the voting and redefine the representation. And there's a movement to create a national assembly. And King Louis recognizes this as a threat to the old regime, and he's going to lock the doors of the Estates General and say, this is not why I called the Estates General. and I don't approve of the discussions you guys are having. Well, that could have been it. That could have been the end of the revolution, but some of the revolutionaries facing a locked door, they decided, you know what, let's go somewhere else and continue this conversation. And there were some outdoor tennis courts close by and some indoor tennis courts, and they go to the tennis courts, and there they create an oath. And the oath is this moment of great energy where they say, we will not disband without a constitution. That the absolute authority of the king needs to be limited by something. It should be limited by the Constitution. So the tennis court oath is saying, we want a constitution. And many days will pass, and as those days pass, increasingly there'll be a number of loyal to the king troops marching towards the city and occupying places in the city. And then the revolutionaries have a feeling that there's going to be violence used against them to counter whatever this is, whatever this movement is. So in a moment of perhaps panic, or again, maybe clarity, they realize we need to get some weapons. We need to arm ourselves. And they also looked around France at the time at the skyline, and there was this one building that was an intimidating building that was always a threat to the people and a symbol of the authority of the king. And it was a prison called the Bastille. Added to all of this, there is this idea that there are some political prisoners in there that maybe need to be freed. So, hoping to free political prisoners, hoping to tear down that symbol of feudalistic order, and hoping to arm themselves, they storm the Bastille. And the storming the Bastille will become their moment of nationhood, their birth of their nation, because this is the people coming together and in a united, as a united force to redefine who they are. Now they're citizens and not subjects. So storming the Bastille is a key physical moment, but more of a key legislative moment comes in the next month. So the storming the Bastille, July 1789. Then next month is going to be August 1789. They're going to put pen to paper. They're going to write down the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And in terms of the evolution of human rights, again, we studied that last year. We'll study it again this year and next year. We can trace it all the way back to Cyrus the Great and Cyrus the Cylinder, but there's key milestones along the way, and one of these milestones is the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen of 1789. So not only is it significant for them, but it's significant for all of us with the evolution of liberalism, the extension of liberty to the people, and a new idea that, in Locke's terms, that the government serves to uphold and protect liberty, not, as Hobbes would argue, to silence our liberty, to control us. So we have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and that's in August of 1789. But that doesn't mean that the lives of the people improve. There's still a crippling bread shortage. And because of the crippling bread shortage, there's a lot of suffering in Paris. And by early fall, the women of Paris, they band together and they march to Versailles. And Versailles is outside of Paris today. You jump on a train, you go to Versailles. It would have been a long march. It would have been a long march for sure. And they're marching there because they still have faith in their king. They believe that they could petition the king, that if the king just knew about how bad the conditions were, surely the king would help them. So the women marched to Versailles with this idea that we are going to petition the king, that we are going to ask the king to address the bread shortages. There will be some revolutionaries, some radicals that are going to join in with the women and manipulate this situation. And as an aside, these French Parisian women that march to Versailles, they are a force. They are a force. They're powerful women that have been working in different industries, so they're quite muscular and they're quite intimidating. So when they get to Versailles, the radicals and the women actually convince the king to come back and live in Paris with them. Now the king obviously wouldn't want to do that, but it seemed clear that he had no other choice. And this is where some people believe that maybe Marie Antoinette, when the royal family's faced with the, hey, we're starving, she comes up with the she comes up with the phrase, let them eat cake. If there's no bread, let them eat cake. Now, she surely didn't say that for real, but this is the moment where history seems to remember it happened. Moving ahead, we have some other major events. One is the civil constitution of the clergy, with the growing power of the revolutionaries. There's this question, whose side is the first estate on? And the clergy is meant to declare their allegiance to the revolution. And, seeing that the revolution is getting out of control, the king and queen are going to attempt to flee France and unite with counter-revolutionaries that are beginning to attack France. And potentially, when the counter-revolutionaries, if they could win the war, then they would, forget that all of this happened and just go back to being an absolute monarchy. Well, in their attempt to flee, King Louis is very foolish, I would argue, in that the legend goes that he's tipping people as he goes with coins that has his face on it. And then, he reveals his face and people identify, hey, this is the king. He's trying to flee France. And he's captured by revolutionaries and sent back to Paris. Now when he's sent back to Paris, there's this change. The idea that our king tried to flee, unite with our enemies. Our king is behaving in a treasonous manner. So it's the beginning, the end of the story for the king, because now the king will be put on trial for treason and ultimately executed. And when the king is executed, we no longer have a monarchy, we have a republic. So back to the idea of these foreign wars. We have these counter-revolutionaries, these reactionaries coming in to try to undo the French Revolution, to try to restore the old regime. A lot of them are emigres, nobles who have fled France and united with family from other areas like Prussia and Austria, and they're invading France now in an attempt to stop the spread of this revolution and ideas like nationalism. We already discussed the execution of the king. I'm going to jump ahead to the Directory. There is the point of time during the reign of terror when the question is, how does this revolution end? How do we end this? And what's the logical ending of this revolution? And in an attempt to restore order, there's going to be a Directory formed after the Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre's reign of terror ends. So Robespierre attempts to use violence to cleanse the Republic, use violence to eliminate any residual loyalty towards the old regime. But when you have thousands of people being guillotined in the streets, eventually the taste for revolution is lost by some, and the revolution turns upon itself. It turns upon its leaders. So new leaders are put into place, the Directory, but the Directory needed someone popular among the people as maybe a figurehead. So they decide Napoleon's that guy. He'll be our figurehead, but we'll be able to control him because he's just a military leader. Well, Napoleon's going to be unhappy with that relationship, and he will end up seizing power from the Directory and declaring himself emperor. That's a very quick look at the French Revolution. I would say that your next step definitely is to go to that 10-minute video here. Take a look at the key events. Review those key events and still piece together that timeline, and we'll see if you have any questions.